Hi, and welcome back to Dr. Heather ND. Tonight I will be showing you how to make an herbal salve. And actually tonight we're just going to start it, tomorrow we'll finish it. Not because making a salve is difficult or time consuming, but because one, it's late. Two, I'm going to actually infuse these herbs into some oil, and having them sit overnight will actually allow more of the medicinal properties to be utilized, to be extracted from the herbs. And three, some of these herbs I picked fresh today. So this is yarrow, that's plantain, and that is goldenrod. And I picked those fresh today, like I said, and as we talked about in our last video, the yarrow styptic mouthwash video, if you're using fresh herbs or fresh plants, it's best to use them as close to harvest time as possible. So we're going to get that started tonight. In case you're wondering, the other herbs in there are butcher's broom and horse chestnut, which I did not harvest. I bought them dried. But all you really need to make a salve, you don't even need these herbs, are oil and beeswax. Technically, a salve is just beeswax melted into oil. You can make it as simple or as complex as you'd like. So by adding some herbs, as we're going to do in this salve, we're making it a little bit more complex. You could make it even more complex by using different types of oils or combinations of oils. So today I'm going to use two. I'm going to use olive oil and almond oil. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll even add a little bit of coconut oil or jojoba or castor oil. Sometimes even some vitamin E. So you can keep it to one oil, you can mix it up depending on the medicinal properties you're going for, what you have around. So you can really customize it however you like. And then again, you're going to need beeswax. So basically the basics of a salve again are oil and beeswax. And then you'll need a way to melt them together, hence our stove tonight. And you'll need something to store it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the oil over these herbs, and then I'll be back to show you just what that looks like. Okay, so I'm just finishing adding in the oils now, and I've got the heat going. Again, this time we used olive oil and sweet almond oil, but you can use any oils, single or a combination that you like. I didn't do any measuring this time around. You don't really have to. Your main goal is to, number one, make enough oil that you can fill whatever containers you're trying to fill. So tonight I'm going for two 2-ounce tins. And in terms of herb to oil ratio, I usually like to plan it out so that I have basically just enough oil to cover the herb, and that'll make for a stronger oil infusion. So that's basically what I've got going here. I had my herbs in the bottom of this pot, and I covered with oil, and now we're going to leave them for about 15 minutes to infuse into the oil. So I will cover it up, and then after 15 minutes I'll turn it off, and then I'll let this sit overnight, and that'll even let a little bit more extraction occur. What you do want to be careful of if you're just infusing your herbs into the oil straight in a pot like this, you don't want to let it burn. And with such a small amount of oil in here, that can be really easy and it can happen really fast. I'm actually even going to turn down my heat a little bit because I hear the oil crackling. So you just want to be sure that you're stirring, swirling it around like this pretty often just to make sure that it doesn't burn, because like I said, that will happen fast and it'll make a big mess and you'll actually ruin your batch. So that's pretty much what the oil infusion part of it looks like. If you were not going to infuse any herbs into your salve, you just wanted to make it a simple salve, again with your oil or oils and your beeswax, you would actually skip this entire step, because the purpose of this step is to extract the medicinal components of the herbs into the oil. But if you're not using any herbs, then you'll actually start with step 2, which is what we're going to be going through tomorrow, and you'll just heat up the oil enough to melt the beeswax into it. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back tomorrow to finish our herbal salve. So it is day 2 of salve making. This is the herbal infused oil, which we first heated for 15 minutes to allow those herbs to infuse into the olive and almond oil, and then I covered that and let it sit overnight. So I'm going to strain it and then show you what we do next. Here we have the strained oil. As you can see, it's not perfectly strained, but that's okay. I'm just using this batch for around the house. I'm not gonna give it to anyone as a gift or anything, so I don't mind having a few little pieces of the plant material in there. There are a number of ways that you can strain your herbs out. I just used this really simple just metal tool, and I just basically poured my herbs over this and let the oil drop through straight into the jar on the stove. You could also use a strainer like this. You could use cheesecloth. It really depends on how finely you want it strained and also what herbs you've used. These were pretty big pieces, so it wasn't too hard to just strain it through something like this with the bigger holes. But if you're using something like chamomile or a plant or flower that has a lot of really small parts, then you probably want to go with a finer strainer. But here we have it going over the stove in our double boiler system. If you were to skip the herbal infusion step, you don't actually need to do any of this straining. Of course, you're just basically starting with your oils from scratch that you would add straight into a jar like this. You could have infused your herbs in a similar double boiler system and not just directly in the bottom of the pot like we did last night. It's totally up to you. I like to have the fewest materials to wash at the end as possible, so that's why I just do it in the bottom of the pot. And then just a word of advice, thinking ahead, this is just an old jar, and it's good to not use something like a good container, as in something that you really want to try to get clean afterwards, because we are going to add beeswax to this. Anytime you're working not just with oil but especially with beeswax, it really sticks to utensils and things like pots and jars really easily. So you want to use something old that you can maybe designate as your salve making jar, for instance, or something that you can just get rid of when you're done. Our oil is heating. When you're making a salve, there's really no hard and fast rules for temperature that you're trying to get the oil to. Your main objective is really just to be able to melt the beeswax into it. So that's what we're going to do now. I've got it over, again, a pretty low heat, but it should be warm enough that the beeswax will start to melt. Another tip is if you're using something like an old jar like this and you're not really sure how heat resistant it will be, just keep it at a lower heat. That way you're not heating anything too quickly. If you did have something like a Pyrex container, maybe you feel better about heating it a little bit more quickly, but today we're going to keep it a little bit slow. And I'm going to start adding the beeswax now. So when you're making a salve, I haven't measured this out, but generally to make a pretty standard thickness salve, you're going to want about a 1:4 ratio of beeswax to oil. But I will show you a trick that lets you get it to the perfect thickness and the perfect consistency that you're looking for. So I'm gonna add a little bit more beeswax now. And I might leave it around that. I might add a little bit more, and then once it's melted, I'll show you how we test the thickness of the finished salve before actually finishing heating it. Now the beeswax we added has melted thoroughly into the oil. If you want to help speed this along during the process, you can stir it or swirl it as you go. That helps the beeswax to melt faster. It also helps to use pellets like the ones that we were using, because those will melt a lot faster than if you buy the beeswax in big chunks. But now that it's melted, we can start to figure out if we're at the consistency that we want. More beeswax will make a thicker salve, and less beeswax will make a thinner, more oily salve. And so the best way to know how this is going to turn out once it's cooled without actually having to let it cool and then figure out what the texture is is to take a utensil, have it ready in the fridge or the freezer. So I just pulled this knife out of the freezer, and then stick it into your salve, pull it out, and the texture that it comes out as will demonstrate what the finished salve will be like. So you can touch it, you can smear it on your skin and see if you've reached the thickness and the consistency that you want with this particular batch. Again, if you want it thicker, add more beeswax. If you want it thinner, all you can really do is add more oil, so you will get a little bit more volume salve. Now that our salve has reached the desired consistency, we can turn off the heat and remove it from the heat. Now if you're done and you're not going to add anything else, for example, I'm going to add some essential oils. If you're done, this is actually ready to pour straight away into your containers. But I want to add essential oils, and in order to do that, I like to wait a little bit until the salve cools off just a bit, because essential oils are basically volatile oils, and so if you heat them too much, you'll lose some of the scent and also the medicinal value. And so the way that you'll know that this is starting to cool is, first of all, it'll start to harden around the edges, and it'll start to get a little bit lighter in color and more opaque looking. So I'm going to wait for it to cool just a little bit. Maybe I'll wait for it to start showing the first signs of cooling, which again is that thickening, that opaque coloration that'll happen right around the edges. Then I'll add my oils and stir well, and then pour in. So I'll show you how we do that in a minute. But again, if you're done at this point and you don't want to add any essential oils or anything else, like maybe vitamin E you could add at this point, then you're ready to pour. So my salve oil has cooled a little bit, not enough to really start seeing signs of cooling, which is okay because we still want to be able to pour it, and we want to make sure our essential oils really get distributed throughout. So now I'm going to add my essential oils, and today I decided to use frankincense and yarrow, and I'm going to put about 6 drops of each in. And so the combination of these oils and the herbs, we're basically going to get a finished product that has anti-inflammatory properties, vulnerary or skin healing properties. It'll also be really good for promoting good circulation and really good for the integrity of the walls of the veins. So I added my essential oils. It looks a little bit blue-green now because of the yarrow. The yarrow actually has a really pretty blue color. So I'm just going to swirl really well. You can use a spoon to stir if you want, but remember, whatever you stick in here is going to be really difficult to clean at the end. But you just want to make sure that your oils are really all mixed well and distributed throughout. And then once you're pretty certain of that, then the final step is to pour. So I didn't measure this out, so I'm not exactly sure how much we're going to make, but I'm just going to try to distribute it evenly between these two. And as you can see, it's starting to harden, and that's what it looks like as it's cooling, so that's a pretty good sign that you don't have much time to work with. But that's it. So we're going to let these cool, and then once they're totally opaque, we know they're done, and then we can move them around and use them. Here are our salves about 15 minutes later. They're almost done cooling and hardening. You can tell because they're becoming a little bit more opaque, but I'm still going to leave them sitting here for a little while until I'm sure that they are totally hardened. But that's really all there is to it. So once they're totally cooled, you can cover and store and then use topically as needed. And that's pretty much all there is to making a salve. It's your beeswax and your oil in about a 1:4 ratio, and then you can make it as simple or as complex as you like. You could keep it with just that beeswax and a single oil. You could spruce it up with infusing your oil with herbs, adding essential oils, using different combinations of oils, adding vitamin E. But once you've got the basics of it down, which is just that beeswax melted into oil, you can pretty much make any salve and customize it any way you like. Hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Dr. Heather ND.